Hey guys, what's good? It's the Tominator, and in this one, we're going to be taking a look at the top 10 best bodybuilders to never win a Mr. Olympia. Now, keep in mind that this is a follow-up to my previous video where we looked at the real uncrowned Mr. Olympias, so if you don't see somebody on here who you feel belongs, chances are they were mentioned in that last vid. Now, the way I went about constructing this list was to basically factor in two things. Number one is contest history. This is really the most objective indicator of greatness because if a guy managed to place runner-up at the Olympia multiple times, win the Arnold Classic, or just rack up a ton of titles at smaller shows, then he's essentially Hall of Fame status, whether you like him or not. Believe me, there's definitely a couple names on here that wouldn't make my personal top 10 list, but objectively speaking, they had to be on here. Factor number two is, of course, the physique itself, and this is always going to be a bit more subjective, which is why I consider it secondary criteria, because we're all going to have our own individual preferences and biases, right? Okay, so with that out of the way, we're going to take a bit of an unconventional approach here and start from the top and work our way down. There's no point in building up the suspense, saving the best for last and everything, because we all know who the top 3 or 4 are going to be anyway. On that note, I'll kick things off with 3 names for you. Flex Wheeler, Kevin Levrone, Shawn Ray. This is like the holy trinity of uncrowned Mr. Olympias right here. And honestly, the order you place them in doesn't really matter. Any one of these guys could easily top the list for various reasons, but based on the criteria we just established, I would put Flex at number 1. Flex Wheeler was a 3-time Olympia runner-up, first in 1993 to Dorian Yates, and then twice more to Ronnie Coleman in 98 and 99. He was also a 4-time Arnold Classic champion in 93, 97, 98, and 2000, and held the record for most Arnold wins until Dexter succeeded him with his 5th in 2015. Flex won the Ironman Pro Invitational 5 times as well. But what really makes him stand out is not just his list of accolades, impressive as they may be, but the phenomenal physique he brought. There's good reason why I ranked him as the most aesthetic bodybuilder of all time. With his beautiful shape and lines, they didn't call him the Sultan of Symmetry for nothing. When he was fully conditioned, Flex, in his prime, displayed arguably the best body to ever grace the stage. To my eyes, at least, the version we witnessed at the 93 Arnold Schwarzenegger Classic remains the very pinnacle for bodybuilding. It just doesn't get any better than this. In 1998, after stringing together 2 impressive first-place showings at the Arnold Classic and Ironman Pro, and in probably his best shape since 93, Flex was considered the heavy favorite heading into the 98 Olympia. Of course, we all know it was not meant to be. Ronnie Coleman, who would supersede Flex's claim to the throne, has been quoted as saying that Flex Wheeler was the greatest bodybuilder he ever competed against. So let that sink in for a moment. Coming in at number 2 is Kevin Levrone. Now, Kevin actually outdid Flex in terms of Olympia runner-ups because he took second 4 times in 92, 95, 2000, and 2002. But on the other hand, he only collected half the number of Arnold Classic championships, one in 94 and the other in 96. But the feather in the cap of Kevin Levrone is that at one time he held the record for the most pro victories with 23, although he'd later be surpassed by both Ronnie Coleman and Dexter Jackson. In terms of their head-to-head matchups, Kevin and Flex had an awesome back-and-forth rivalry. Levrone had a big advantage early on, beating Flex at the 91 MPC Nationals, forcing Flex to wait another year to turn pro, and then narrowly edging him out in the star-studded 96 Arnold Classic, one of my favorite shows of all time. By the end of 1996, he owned a comfortable 5-2 lead against Wheeler. However, Flex would turn the tables for the most part after that, beating the Maryland Muscle Machine in the 1997 and 2000 Arnold Classics, and also coming out on top in the 98 and 99 Olympias, to eventually win the career matchup 8-7 when it was all said and done. But aside from that, the main reason I rank Flex just a smidgen over Levrone is because I believe his physique was just a little better. Now, obviously, this is personal preference, but in terms of shape, detail, and flow, Flex had the edge. Plus, having 2 additional Arnold trophies on his mantelpiece has got to count for something. Shawn Ray is my choice for number 3. He was first runner-up twice behind Dorian Yates in 1994 and 96, and also claimed 2 Arnold Classic victories in 1990 and 91. Now, the record books will tell you Mike Ashley was the official winner of the 1990 Arnold. Nuh-uh. Shawn won that show. The thing was, this was the time period where the IFBB were trying to clean up their act, so to speak. Bottom line is that Shawn failed the drug test and was forced to relinquish the title. It was utterly ridiculous. I mean, in a sport like professional bodybuilding, in which anybody with 2 brain cells to rub together realizes that drugs obviously play an integral part, what is the point in drug testing? It's like when they retroactively stripped Lance Armstrong of his Tour de France victories for blood doping. And you're telling me the second place guy wasn't doing the exact same thing? So anyway, 2 Arnold Classics and 2 Olympia silver medals. On the surface then, it would seem like Ray was a clear step down from the slightly more decorated Levrone and Wheeler, but in terms of consistency, he was actually the best of the 3 hands down. Shawn was literally never off. He made the top 5 at the Olympia for a record-setting 12 straight years, spanning from 1990 all the way up to 2001, at which point he would formally retire. And this is even more of a feat when you consider just how stacked those 90s lineups were. I would also argue that Shawn's physique had the least number of flaws as well. Wheeler was narrow and notoriously soft through the hams and glutes, while Kevin lacked back detail and bicep peak. Shawn Ray was also narrow earlier on, but towards the latter half of his career, he'd fill out considerably. At the end of the day, his only real significant shortcoming was, no pun intended, his short stature. But the reason I ultimately rank him third and not first is because he didn't have as many close calls at the Olympia, nor as many overall titles as Flex or Levrone. But certainly, as previously mentioned, any one of these gentlemen could be considered the best bodybuilder to never win an Olympia. They're all so close, we're essentially splitting hairs here. And not far behind this trio of 90s legends looms the Predator, Greene, at number 4. With 3 second-place Olympia finishes from 2012 to 2014, and likewise 3 Arnold Classic titles in 2009, 2010, and 2016, Kai is unquestionably one of the greatest bodybuilders to never lay claim to a Sandow trophy. In fact, you might even argue he deserves to place ahead of one, if not all 3 names we just saw, though of course I wouldn't. And the main reason is because his physique, while freakishly awe-inspiring as it may be, was never quite as admirable as theirs, at least not on an aesthetic level. Kai, like anyone else, is a product of his era, meaning that there were many occasions where his midsection was distended and unsightly. That alone knocks him down a couple of pegs in my book, but then you also have to consider the fact that the lineups he was competing in weren't as deep either. But while Kai may not have been the most aesthetic, his amazing, one-of-a-kind posing lent him this undeniable charisma and entertainment factor. For a man approaching 300 pounds, Kai possessed unbelievable grace and agility on stage. He's like a Brock Lesnar in the sense that someone that big should not be able to move that well. Combine that unorthodox posing style with his thought-provoking, philosophical nature and a perennial underdog status, and you have the makings of a people's champion written all over him. In terms of his physique, Kai had some truly standout features like his extraordinarily peaked biceps, massively ripped hamstrings and glutes, and the ridiculously thick low lats. Another thing that Levrone, Ray, and Wheeler all have on Kai, though, is the advantage of longevity. They all competed for over a decade at the highest levels, whereas Kai was really only a top pro from about 2007 or 08 to 2014, mounting a brief comeback in 2016. It's a shame he hasn't been competing these past several years. Who knows how many more notable victories he could have added to his resume. In 5th place, we have the mass with class, Labrada, one of the most high-profile bodybuilders of the 80s and early 90s. While he never won an Arnold Classic, largely because he wouldn't bother entering it until the twilight of his career when he was already a little past his prime, Labrada was a 2-time Olympia runner-up to Lee Haney in 1989 and 1990. Like Shawn Ray after him, Lee was noted for a track record of excellency. He achieved a top 4 finish at the Olympia for 7 consecutive years, from 1987 to 1993. Last I checked, those were the only times he even competed at the event, meaning that Lee never placed lower than 4th at the Mr. Olympia during his entire career. Talk about setting the bar high for his son Hunter. Now, if one were to say that Greene is the greatest modern poser in all of bodybuilding, and Arnold himself has stated more than once that Kai is the greatest poser he's ever seen, then Labrada might very well be the greatest classic poser to ever don a pair of trunks. His fluid yet powerful execution remains a true spectacle for the ages. Only a handful of others like Cormier, McCoway, Paris, and Ray can even compare. And other than his masterful posing, Labrada was very balanced and polished, a consistently well-oiled machine, the forerunner to Shawn Ray in many ways. And while Lee never exhibited the same voluminous roundness to his muscle bellies like Ray, he was always a little flatter and leaner. The way I would describe him was that he was like a hybrid between Frank Zane and Shawn Ray. He was a perfect bridge between those two eras. Okay, and this next bodybuilder at number 6 is one who would be nowhere near my personal top 10, but as a former 3-time Olympia runner-up and an Arnold Classic champion, there's simply no two ways about it. Rich Gaspari needed to be included. he placed second behind Lee Haney 3 consecutive years, from 1986 to 1988, and captured the inaugural Arnold Classic title in 1989. In fact, in light of that information, you could make a solid case for Gaspari over Labrada. But the reason I put Lee in front is because physique-wise, Rich is probably the least impressive on here in my opinion. His biggest claim to fame was being ripped to the bone and ushering in the era of striated glutes. But nevertheless, his track record speaks volumes. You can try to brush it off by saying that he simply competed in a weak era, but during his peak, Rich was placing ahead of people like Lee Labrada, Bertil Fox, Tom Platz, Bob Paris, Albert Beckles, Barry DeMay, Mike Christian, Gary Stridham, and Brian Buchanan. So was the competition really that bad, or was Gaspari perhaps just that good? In a past video, I referred to Rich as a prime example of someone who managed to overcome serious genetic shortcomings and go on to have a stellar career, and I stand by that. Gaspari was a workhorse in the gym and extremely meticulous when it came to the dieting, which is no doubt how he was able to fend off genetically superior opponents like some of those mentioned above. Alright, and from this point on, things get a little dicey. That top 6 is pretty straightforward and convincing, but these last 4 are a lot more subjective and open to interpretation. So bear that in mind going forward. But next up, at number 7, I've selected the real deal Chris Cormier. This dude was highly underrated, being overshadowed as he was by all those other 90s superstars. But Cormier was a complete bodybuilder with a great structure and virtually no missing body parts. His heavy lifting in the gym also lent him a density that few others could match. Cormier is the only guy on this list who doesn't own an Arnold Classic to his name, but he basically makes up for it by laying claim to a whopping 6 runner-up finishes there, from 2000 straight through to 2005. This stands as the record for the most second places at the Arnold, by the way. And during that heartbreaking span, he was losing to legends like Flex, Jay, Ronnie, and Dexter, so it's not like he was being beaten by some chumps either. Cormier's highest finish at the Olympia was 3rd in both 1999 and 2002. I've unofficially crowned him as the greatest bodybuilder to never win an Olympia or an Arnold, and I think many people would agree with that. He also went on a roll at the Ironman Pro, capturing 4 straight first-place awards at that event from 1999 to 2002. And as I noted in my other video, Cormier's physique was so balanced that it might have actually hurt him in the end, because he didn't have any real standout body parts or poses. The judges may have tended to overlook him compared to flashier competitors. At number 8, we have the Dominican dominator, Victor Martinez. Now, it's true that Victor only won the Arnold Classic once in 2007, and likewise only took second at the Olympia one time. But the reason I put him firmly on this list, no questions asked, is because that 2000 placing was, in the words of Flex Wheeler, bullshit. He really should have knocked off Jay that year. There's still no doubt in my mind as to who the rightful winner was, so Vic gets bonus points for that. But anyway, he also took 3rd in 2006 and 2011 at both the Arnold and the Olympia for both years, and placed runner-up to Greene at the 2009 Arnold. And here's an interesting tidbit. Ronnie Coleman himself, towards the tail end of his reign, I believe it was around 2004 or so, stated on record that he thought Victor would be the one to succeed him as Mr. Olympia, not Jay Cutler. So that right there should tell you something about just how great Victor was in his prime. He had a highly aesthetic physique with nice lines and polish. It was similar to the current Mr. O, Shawn Rhoden, in the sense that he wasn't overpowering everybody with sheer mass, but rather everything just sort of flowed well together, and the shape and proportions were quite pleasing. Vince Taylor lands at number 9. This is another one of those unheralded stars of the 90s who nobody seems to talk about anymore, but for a while there, he actually held the record for the most IFBB wins with 22, which is the primary reason he makes the list. As mentioned previously, this mark would of course be surpassed by Kevin Levrone and eventually Ronnie Coleman and Dexter Jackson as well, but it's still an impressive highlight on his resume. Vince Taylor was the 1992 Arnold Classic champion and finished 3rd in the 1989 and 91 Olympias. In addition, he won a slew of Masters titles, including a record-setting 5 Masters Mr. Olympias in 96, 97, 99, 2000, and 2001. And for those of you who don't know, the Masters was essentially an additional Olympia class for athletes over 40 years old that has since been discontinued. Physique-wise, Taylor was somewhat underrated as well because he didn't really have any weaknesses, aside from perhaps his lower quadriceps. He had what Vince Gironda would have called turnip thighs, meaning that they were large and full towards the top by the waist but narrower down by the knee, a result of knee problems that prevented Taylor from doing squats or hack squats. But aside from the likes of Albert Beckles and Robbie Robinson, who else demonstrated this type of longevity where they could step on stage after the age of 50 and still look this great? Even Dexter hasn't reached that mark yet. Okay, and this number 10 placing was absolutely killing me because there's honestly so many guys you could slot in here. Lee Priest, Paul Dillette, Branch Warren, Dennis Wolf. I could go on, but ultimately I had to go with Nasser El Sonbaty. Now, while it's true that Branch Warren had 2 Arnold Classics, whereas Nasser only had 1 in 1999, I really just couldn't bring myself to suggest that Branch was the better bodybuilder. After all, I don't believe he deserved that second Arnold in 2012 over Dennis Wolf. It's a shame, then, that the big bad Wolf didn't prevail there, or it would have made this decision so much easier. But alas, Branch had to go and spice things up. But as for Nasser, here's one of the premium mass monsters of the 90s, along with Dillette and Dorian. And what puts him in this over his contemporaries like Lee Priest and Paul Dillette is that Nasser actually won an Arnold Classic, and he took a very controversial second place behind Dorian Yates in 1997, which is why, like Victor Martinez, I had to give him some bonus points. But from the front and sides, Nasser was damn near unstoppable so long as he was conditioned. His size and thick development was just overwhelming. It's only from the back that he faltered, as he always seemed to hold water there and looked soft compared to guys like Ray and Levrone, let alone Yates. But still, he was a downright beast, and I think deserving of his placing here. So there you have it, folks. In my estimation, the top 10 best bodybuilders to never win that elusive Mr. Olympia title. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. But let's just quickly go through a few more honorable mentions before we wrap things up, and I'm just going to gloss over this because otherwise we'd be here all day. So at this point, you may be wondering, where the heck is Serge Nubret, Robbie Robinson, Lou Ferrigno, Tom Platz, Danny Padilla, Bob Paris, Lee Priest, Paul Dillette, Marcus Ruhl, Gunter Schlierkamp, Big Ramy, Rolly Winkler? The common denominator in each of these cases is that they simply didn't win enough major titles or place high enough at the Olympia on a consistent basis. So while you could certainly argue that they belong here on the basis of their physique alone, remember that I was heavily weighting this thing according to their contest placings. And I had to keep it capped at 10, right? I mean, this isn't a top 20. This is a top 10. So someone had to get cut. All right, so that does it all for this one, guys. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed and maybe even learned a thing or two. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe for more. And until next time, I'm the Tominator signing off, and I'll be back.